Make sure your homework's done and your teeth are brushed. These are some of my piano tips and tricks.
Okay, now that I've sufficiently weirded out my audience, I shall continue with the lesson. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of tips and tricks that are I'm going to stack on top of each other to get some sort of a more complex yet still simple style that I think is pretty hard to come by. At least I hope it is, because I've developed a lot of these things hoping that they would make me a sort of unique piano player. So the first thing I want to show you is, or the first tip I want to give you is to think about chords and music and playing the piano in your hands specifically in terms of the shapes that they make. So think of this as a shape. I know it's not a common shape. It's not a circle. It's not a square. It's, you know, got some elements of triangularity if you connect the dots. But think of your hand as this shape. And the more you think about it, the more you'll be able to distinguish between a shape like this and a shape like this. Okay, so thinking about things in terms of shapes helps you in a lot of ways, because when you need to play groups of things, you can look for the next shape. You can sort of chunk what you have to do in terms of shapes. So, you know, I can just know that I'm going to be playing this shape down here, or so maybe I need to know that this shape. I can see that shape on the board, and because I'm in tune to thinking about shapes, my fingers sort of fill in the blanks. Instead of having to think of each note one at a time, I think of it in terms of big chunks. Okay, so that's the first tip. Shapes. Another reason shapes are good is because, specifically on the piano, for some reason, probably because there's some sort of math related to this and there's some evenness that I don't really fully comprehend, shapes make sort of reoccur more often than you would initially think. This shape, for instance, this first one I taught you, where my thumb is playing a G, I'm playing a C in my 2, an E flat with my 3, and then another G. And I like to double octaves in the thumb and the pinky. I don't know how many people do that or how common it is, but you can do whatever you want. So for a shape like this, you might think that that's such a weird shape you wouldn't see it again, but here it is again. It's just like, and in that song Paul Simon's Old Friends, Old Friends. So I don't know if he was thinking about shapes when he made his song. He writes on the guitar, so I don't know if it translates, but my point is that on the piano you can play shapes and they sort of find themselves appearing more often than not. Obviously you hopefully remember from like learning just the majors, C, E, and G for instance, there's a major, and that sort of shape, I like to think of it as a W shape. That confuses some people. It gets repeated in the F and the G major, in the A minor, D minor, and E minor. So that one shape, that sort of one W shape, gets repeated all over the place. So thinking about things in terms of shapes is really, really good. And you kind of have to just dive into it and trust yourself. Or trust me, or don't trust me. Just do it. Okay, so the next sort of trick that I developed in college was I was trying to find a way to play piano in a different way. To play piano in a way that people hadn't heard before, so that there was still some structure to it, and yet it still made people think, like, what am I listening to right now? That sounds interesting, like piquing people's interests. So instead of thinking about playing the piano in terms of something in my right hand, something in my left hand, I tried to blur what my hands would do together. So an exaggeration is like, you know, and it sounds awful. It sounds awful like that, but in other words, to play some notes with my left hand that were actually higher in the keyboard than the lowest notes in my right hand. And you may have already noticed me doing that with Old Friends. Old Friends. So my thumb is playing A flat, while my thumb in my left hand is playing an A flat, and the thumb in my right hand is playing a G. So the thumb in my left hand is actually higher than the thumb in my right hand, so I end up with a shape kind of like this. And the reason why I think that's an interesting thing to experiment with is because while you could easily play, you know, the notes, just the notes that you needed, or even play it like this, playing it like this allows you to develop some interesting patterns. Like when I do rolls with both hands, rolling from the bottom, an A flat, an E flat, an A flat, and then in my right hand, G, C, E flat, and G, when I roll those together, I don't get an exact left to right. I get left, 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 and then go down a little bit before the next one. So you all of a sudden are starting to get some interesting things. And I could also do some things like play the outsides. Starting to do sort of just coming up with patterns that my hands naturally feel from playing chords before, rolling them and doing all kinds of other little tricks. But now when my hands are stacked, interlaced like this, you start to get some interesting sounds that are sort of unexpected and yet really cool. So the last trick I'm going to show you is sort of applying this way of thinking about piano shapes and interlacing things, interlacing shapes and interlacing your hands, and repeating them up the keyboard. So the keyboard is like 8 octaves or so of notes that are pretty much the same thing. C to B. I'm sorry, yeah, C to B, and then it repeats C to B. I don't know if you can see how high up on the keyboard. Okay, well, yeah. So what you can do, and it's going to be hard to see with the camera because it just doesn't zoom that far out, but you can repeat a shape. So here's a shape. That's the same shape, but it's just starting a little lower. You can take that same sort of shape and then repeat it an octave higher after you apply some pattern to that shape. So watch. And now I've kind of got a couple of restraints. The tripod leg is right here, so it's hard for me to move my hand quickly this way. But if you listen, you're not going to be able to see my hands, but I'm going to be basically be doing this. I'm going to be repeating. It's hard to see up there, but when you use your two hands like this in an sort of laced way, it allows you to sort of creatively jump between octaves in a way that people think of as smooth, and yet it's not necessarily doing that. Oh, yeah. So here, I'm going to actually bring this back a little bit. So those are the 3 tricks. I'm going to try and show you a version of me playing the whole piano with that last trick so you can get an idea for what I mean. So you're going to be playing, I'm just going to be repeating this chord. And that's pretty much it. Hope those tricks can give you some help learning the piano. Bye!